Case 1. Samuel Little McDowell. Samuel Little McDowell was born on June 7, 1940, in Reynolds, Georgia. He was a notorious serial killer who was convicted of 8 murders and confessed to committing 93 murders between 1970 and 2005. It never happened by accident. He stated that he began having sexual fantasies about strangling women as a child, starting when he saw his kindergarten teacher touch her neck. As a teenager, he collected true crime magazines depicting the strangulation of women. The majority of Little's victims were sex workers, substance users, or homeless individuals, and most of them were female. He claimed that he thought these persons would leave fewer clues for authorities to find and leave fewer persons to search for them. Despite the broad scope of his offending, Little was charged with and convicted of only 8 murders in total, as these cases had the strongest evidence of guilt. One of the 8 murders he was convicted for is Annie Lee Stewart, 32 years, who was murdered on October 11, 1981, in Cincinnati, Ohio. Little strangled her and disposed of her body in the woods behind some apartments off Queen and Place in Grove City, Ohio. Little was convicted of her murder on August 23, 2019. Another victim is Mary Jo Payton, 21, who was murdered sometime in 1984 after she encountered Little at a bar in Cleveland, Ohio. Little claimed that he and Payton left the bar together. He then took her to an abandoned factory. He choked her there before throwing her body down a basement staircase. 2 workers from a nearby company discovered her dead on July 3, 1984. Little was convicted on August 23, 2019. Carol Linda Alford, a 41 years old, who was murdered by Little in Los Angeles, California. Authorities discovered Little's first DNA match on her underwear and under her fingernails. On July 13, 1987, her body was discovered in a Los Angeles alley. From the waist down, she was nude. Her daughter recognized her body. An autopsy indicated that she had been strangled to death. She also experienced other wounds, such as a punch-related head injury from blunt force. Little was found guilty of the crime on September 25, 2014. Another Little's victim was Audrey Nelson Everett, 35, who was found in a dumpster behind a nightclub and restaurant in Los Angeles, California, on August 14, 1989. There was nothing found that could be used to identify her body, which was naked from the waist down. She had been repeatedly hit on the head before being forcefully strangled, according to an autopsy. DNA linked Little to the crime, and he was convicted on September 25, 2014. One of his victims was Guadalupe Apodaca, a 46 years old, who was found on September 3, 1989, at an abandoned auto repair shop in Los Angeles, California, after a young boy kicking a soccer ball against the building peered into the windows and saw her body. Authorities determined that Little kneeled on her chest and strangled her with his hands, causing her to have a seizure. She was nude from the waist down and had blood in her anal cavity as well. DNA linked Little to the crime, and he was convicted on September 25, 2014. Another of his victims was Zena Marie Jones, a 30-year-old woman found murdered in West Memphis, Arkansas on July 28, 1990, after going missing on July 6 from Memphis, Tennessee. On the Arkansas side of the Mississippi River, close to the shore, and about 8 feet from the river's mile marker 722.2, a fisherman discovered the victim. Little admitted to killing her and provided a sketch in 2018. He claimed she was a prostitute who was between the ages of 28 and 29 and that he had picked her up at a Memphis motel. As a Memphis police car passed them, he choked her while they were in his car. He then dropped the victim into the river once he entered Arkansas and pulled up to a bridge. On August 23, 2019, he was found guilty of her homicide. She was identified in April 2022 after her family noticed a resemblance between the composite sketch drawn by Little and Jones. Rose Evans, a 32 years old, who was murdered in Cleveland, Ohio on or around August 24, 1991. Little encountered Evans while driving and offered her a ride. Then, in an abandoned area, he strangled her in his car. He was convicted of her murder on August 23, 2019. Denise Christie, a 32-year-old mother of 2 who was found dead in Odessa, Texas on February 2, 1994. Denise had been reported missing on January 1st, 1994. According to District Attorney Bobby Bland, she had been strangled. Little pleaded guilty to killing her, receiving his fourth life sentence for it on December 13, 2018. The FBI's Violent Criminal Apprehension Program has confirmed his involvement in at least 60 murders, the largest number of confirmed victims for any serial killer in American history. Little provided sketches for 26 of his victims, although not all have been linked to known murders. His crime spree stretched across the country from Miami to Los Angeles. Also, in 1961, Little was sentenced to 3 years in prison for breaking into a furniture store in Lorraine. He was released in 1964. By 1975, he had been arrested 26 times in 11 states for crimes including theft, assault, attempted rape, fraud, and attacks on government officials. In 1982, Little was arrested in Pascagoula, Mississippi, and he faced charges for the murder of 22-year-old Melinda Rose LaPree, who had gone missing in September of that year. A grand jury declined to indict him for her murder. However, while under investigation, Little was extradited to Florida and tried for the murder of 26-year-old Patricia Ann Mount, whose body had been found in September 1982. Prosecution witnesses identified Little in court as a person who had spent time with Mount on the night before her disappearance. Due to mistrust of witness testimonies, Little was acquitted in January 1984. Little moved to California, where he stayed in the vicinity of San Diego. In October 1984, he was arrested for kidnapping, beating, and strangling 22-year-old Lori Barros, who survived. 1 month later, he was found by police in the back seat of his car with an unconscious woman, also beaten and strangled, in the same location as the attempted murder of Barros. Little served 2.5 years in prison for both crimes. Upon his release in February 1987, he immediately moved to Los Angeles and committed at least 10 additional murders. Little was arrested on September 5, 2012, at Wayside Christian Homeless Shelter in Louisville, Kentucky, and extradited to California to face a narcotics charge, after which authorities used DNA testing to establish that he was involved in the murders of Linda Alford, killed on July 13, 1987, Audrey Nelson Everett, killed on August 14, 1989, and Guadalupe Duarte Apodaca, killed on September 3, 1989. All 3 women were killed and later found on the streets of Los Angeles. He was extradited to Los Angeles, where he was charged on January 7, 2013. A few months later, the police said that Little was being investigated for involvement in 3 dozen murders committed in the 1980s, which until then had been undisclosed. In connection with the new circumstances, in Mississippi, the LaPree murder case was reopened. In total, Little was tested for involvement in 93 murders of women in many states. On December 30, 2020, he died in a Los Angeles County area hospital from diabetes, heart problems, and other health conditions. I deeply appreciate you for watching this far. It really means a lot. Do well to hit the subscribe button so it would help the video to reach more people. Case 2. Jeffrey Dahmer. Jeffrey Dahmer was born on May 21, 1960. Infamously known as the Milwaukee Cannibal or Milwaukee Monster, was an American serial killer whose crimes shocked the world. Between 1978 and 1991, he murdered 17 men and boys, committing acts that placed him among the most disturbing figures in criminal history. Jeffrey Dahmer committed his first ever murder in 1978, 3 weeks after his graduation. On June 18th, Dahmer picked up a hitchhiker named Stephen Mark Hicks, who was 18 years old. Hicks, who had been hitchhiking to a rock concert at Chippewa Lake Park, agreed to accompany Dahmer to his house upon the promise of a few beers with Dahmer, who had the house to himself. According to Dahmer, the sight of the bare-chested Hicks standing at the roadside stirred his sexual feelings, although when Hicks began talking about girls, he knew any sexual passes he made would be rebuffed. After several hours of talking, drinking, and listening to music, Hicks wanted to leave, and I didn't want him to leave. Dahmer hit Hicks with a 10-pound dumbbell. He later stated he struck Hicks twice from behind with the dumbbell as Hicks sat upon a chair. When Hicks fell unconscious, Dahmer strangled him to death with the bar of the dumbbell, then stripped the clothes from Hicks's body before exploring his chest with his hands. then masturbating as he stood above the corpse. Hours later, Dahmer dragged the body to the basement. On November 20th, 1987, Dahmer, at the time still residing with his grandmother, he encountered a 25-year-old man from Ontonagon, Michigan, named Stephen Twomey at a bar and persuaded him to return to the Ambassador Hotel in Milwaukee, where Dahmer had rented a room for the evening. According to Dahmer, he had no intention of killing Twomey, but intended to simply drug him and lie beside him as he explored his body. The following morning, Dahmer awoke to find Twomey lying beneath him on the bed, his chest crushed in and black and blue with bruises. Blood was seeping from the corner of his mouth, and Dahmer's fists and one forearm were extensively bruised. Dahmer later said he had no memory of having killed Twomey, and that he could not believe this had happened. Dahmer purchased a large suitcase, in which he transported Twomey's body to his grandmother's residence. 1 week later, he severed the head, arms, and legs, then filleted the bones from the body before cutting the flesh into pieces small enough to handle. Dahmer placed the flesh inside plastic garbage bags. Two months after the Twomey killing, Dahmer encountered a 14-year-old Native American prostitute, James Dockstader. Dahmer lured him to his grandmother's residence with an offer of $50 to pose for nude pictures. They engaged in sexual activity before Dahmer drugged Dockstader and strangled him on the floor of the cellar. Dahmer left the body in the cellar for 1 week before dismembering it in much the same manner as he had with Twomey. He placed all of Dockstader's remains, excluding the skull, in the trash. The skull was boiled and cleansed in bleach before Dahmer found that it, too, had been rendered brittle by the process. He pulverized the skull 2 weeks later. On March 24th, 1988, Dahmer met a 22-year-old bisexual man, Richard Guerrero, outside a gay bar called the Phoenix. Dahmer lured Guerrero to his grandmother's residence, offering him $50 to spend the night with him. He drugged Guerrero with sleeping pills, strangled him with a leather strap, and performed oral sex on the corpse. Dahmer dismembered Guerrero's body within 24 hours, again disposing of the remains in the trash and retaining the skull before pulverizing it several months later. That on April 2nd, Dahmer encountered 25-year-old Ronald Douglas Flowers Jr. at a pay phone outside a gay bar. Flowers was lured to Dahmer's grandmother's house on the pretense of Dahmer obtaining cables to recharge the battery of Flowers' stranded vehicle. However, after giving Flowers a drugged coffee, both he and Flowers heard Dahmer's grandmother call, "Is that you, Jeff?" Although Dahmer replied in a manner that led his grandmother to believe he was alone, she observed that he was not alone. After Flowers became unconscious, Dahmer decided not to kill him. Hours later, while Flowers was still largely incoherent, Dahmer walked him to a bus stop, where he left him. Flowers later woke in the County General Hospital with visible bruise marks upon his neck, and later discovered his underwear were inside out. Dahmer was arrested on 23rd of July, 1991 after an intended victim escaped from his apartment. Although diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, BPD, schizotypal personality disorder, SPD, and a psychotic disorder, he was declared legally sane at his trial. He was convicted of 16 counts of murder in Wisconsin and 1 in Ohio and sentenced to 16 terms of life imprisonment without parole in 1992. On November 28, 1994, Dahmer was killed by fellow inmate Christopher Scarver at the Columbia Correctional Institution in Wisconsin, bringing a brutal end to one of the darkest chapters in criminal history. Case 3. Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy was born on November 24, 1946 in Burlington, Vermont. He was considered an infamous American serial killer who kidnapped, raped, and murdered dozens of young women and girls between 1974 and 1978. He is also called Campus Killer and Lady Killer. His operating style typically consisted of convincing his target that he was in need of assistance or duping them into believing he was an authority figure. He would then lure his victim to his vehicle, at which point he would beat them unconscious, then restrain them with handcuffs before driving them to a remote location to be sexually assaulted and killed. During his childhood days, a neighbor from Tacoma described Bundy as a deeply troubled and cruel child who seemed to take pleasure in causing fear and pain. According to her recollections, he displayed disturbing behavior from an early age, including acts of animal cruelty. She claimed that on one occasion, he allegedly hung a stray cat from a backyard clothesline and set it ablaze using lighter fluid. The neighbor also alleged that Bundy would lure younger children from the neighborhood into nearby wooded areas, where he would intimidate and terrorize them. "You could hear the screams from blocks away," she recalled. "No matter where we were, we could hear them screaming." She further claimed that Bundy constructed crude, punji-style traps around parts of the Tacoma neighborhood, with at least one young girl reportedly suffering injuries after falling victim to one of them. These are some of his victims. Out on January 4th, in the early hours of the morning, Karen Sparks was attacked inside her own bedroom in Seattle's University District while she slept peacefully. The assailant brutally battered and sexually assaulted her, leaving her barely alive. Although Karen survived the horrific attack, the severe injuries she suffered caused permanent brain damage, forever altering the course of her life. On February 1st, Linda and a 21-year-old college student who went missing from her basement apartment in Seattle after being violently attacked in her sleep. Investigators later discovered evidence of a savage brutality before she was abducted into the night. After her murder, her body was decapitated and dismembered. Years later, portions of her remains, including her jawbone, were recovered near Taylor Mountain, confirming the grim fate that had long haunted investigators. The same year, on March 12th, Donna Gail Manson disappeared while walking to a concert at Evergreen State College, seemingly vanishing without a trace. According to later confessions, her body was abandoned in the remote wilderness near Taylor Mountain. Despite extensive searches, Donna's remains were never conclusively identified. Decades later, investigators speculated that unidentified skeletal remains were discovered near Eatonville, Washington, may have belonged to her, but crucial evidence was reportedly destroyed before forensic confirmation could ever be made. Another victim is Susan Elaine Rancourt, 28 years old, who mysteriously disappeared into the night. For months, her family and investigators searched desperately for answers. In 1975, fragments of her remains, including her skull and jawbone, were recovered near Taylor Mountain. The bones showed signs of severe fractures, revealing the extreme violence she endured before her death. Ted Bundy stated that he frequently revisited the bodies of his victims, grooming and performing sex acts on the corpses until decomposition and destruction by wild animals made further interactions impossible. Along with the murders, Bundy was also a prolific burglar, and on a few occasions he broke into homes at night and battered, maimed, strangled, and sexually assaulted his victims in their sleep. In 1975, Bundy was arrested and jailed in Utah for aggravated kidnapping and attempted criminal assault. He then became a suspect in a progressively longer list of unsolved homicides in several states. Facing murder charges in Colorado, Bundy engineered 2 dramatic escapes and committed further assaults in Florida, including 3 murders, before being recaptured in 1978. For the Florida homicides, he received 3 death sentences in 2 trials and was executed in the electric chair at Florida State Prison on January 24, 1989. A biographer and Rule characterized Bundy as a sadistic sociopath who took pleasure from another human's pain and the control he had over his victims, to the point of death and even after. He once described himself as the most cold-hearted son of a bitch you'll ever meet, a statement with which attorney Polly Nelson, a member of his last defense team, agreed. She wrote that Ted was the very definition of heartless evil. While the names of these killers became infamous, the victims should never be forgotten. If you enjoyed this documentary, kindly subscribe for more true crime stories every week.